Hello everyone. I agreed to meet a man I had connected with on a professional networking site. We had exchanged messages over several weeks, discussing the possibility of a job opportunity in his company. He seemed friendly and knowledgeable, and I was eager for a chance to prove myself. When he suggested meeting at a local coffee shop for an informal interview, I thought it was a good idea. The place was quiet, with a comfortable atmosphere, which seemed perfect for a conversation. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at a small table near the window. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a confident smile. He ordered us both coffee, and the smell of fresh beans filled the air. I felt hopeful as we started talking about the job and my experience. The conversation was pleasant at first, and I thought this might turn into something real. Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. After a few minutes, I noticed he was staring at me oddly, his smile lingering too long. I felt a bit uneasy but tried to focus on what he was saying about the company's goals. When he handed me the cup of coffee, I took a sip without hesitation. Shortly after, I began to feel dizzy, like the room was spinning slowly. My limbs felt heavy, and my thoughts started to blur. I realized something was wrong, and I tried to stay alert, but the drug was working too fast. I wanted to get up and leave, but my body betrayed me. I managed to whisper a question, asking what was in the drink, but he just smiled and leaned closer. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was his face, calm but cold. I lost consciousness, unable to move or speak. When I woke up, I was in a different place, a small, dimly lit room. The walls were bare, and the air was thick with a strange metallic smell. Panic surged through me as I tried to move, but my wrists and ankles were bound. I struggled against the restraints, my heart pounding loudly in my ears. Fear mixed with confusion, and I wondered how long I had been unconscious. I called out for help, hoping someone nearby would hear me, but only silence answered. The man from the coffee shop was nowhere to be seen, and I had no idea where I was or why I was taken. My mind raced through every possible scenario, trying to find a way out or remember anything that might help. I realized I needed to stay calm if I wanted to survive this ordeal. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Time felt strange in that place. Eventually, the door opened, and he stepped inside with a smug expression. He explained in a cold, detached voice that I was now part of an experiment he was conducting. The job interview was just a cover to lure me into this trap. He wanted to test how far someone could be pushed under pressure and drugs. I felt a surge of anger and terror all at once. I told him I would fight, that I would find a way out no matter what. He seemed amused by my determination, but that did not stop him from leaving me alone again. This time I tried to think clearly, focusing on any possible weakness in the restraints or the room. I noticed a small vent near the ceiling and started planning how to reach it. Over the next day, I gathered strength and patience, trying to conserve energy while searching for an opportunity. I listened carefully to every sound outside the door, memorizing patterns and timing. When the man returned, I forced myself to stay calm and pretend to be weaker than I was. I watched his movements closely, waiting for the moment he would be careless. That moment came when he opened the door to bring me food. I twisted my wrist sharply and managed to free one hand from the binding. My heart pounded as I grabbed the keys from his belt and unlocked the rest of my restraints. I waited until he was distracted, then sprinted toward the door and pushed it open. The hallway was dim, but I could see an exit sign down the corridor. I ran as fast as I could, ignoring the pain in my muscles and the fear in my chest. I heard footsteps behind me, but I did not look back. I reached the main entrance and saw the street lights glowing through the glass doors. With a desperate push, I opened them and stepped outside into the cool night air. I was free, but still trembling from the experience. I did not stop running until I found a nearby store that was open late. I rushed inside and asked the clerk to call 911 immediately. While waiting for the police to arrive, I explained everything, trying to stay composed. The officers took my statement seriously and promised to investigate the place where I had been held. I felt relief knowing that help was on its way. In the days that followed, I slowly recovered from the trauma and tried to piece together what had happened. The man was arrested, and authorities found evidence of other victims. I cooperated fully with the investigation, determined to make sure he could not hurt anyone else. Despite the fear I still carried, I found strength in knowing I survived and spoke out. This experience changed me, making me more cautious but also stronger. I learned to trust my instincts more and never ignore warning signs. Meeting strangers, even in professional settings, now feels different, and I am careful about who I allow into my life. Yet, I refuse to let fear control me or stop me from pursuing my goals. I survived something terrible, and that gives me power. Life moved forward slowly but surely. I went back to job hunting, choosing safer ways to connect with people. Each interview became a test of both my skills and my judgment. I remembered the lesson I learned that night: not everyone who smiles is kind. But I also remembered my own courage, which helped me escape and live to tell the story. That is something no one can take away. Story 2. Orseu. I worked in adult film production for several years, a world most people only glimpsed through rumor or gossip. The sets were always busy, full of energy and a strange mix of professionalism and chaos. Everyone had their roles and responsibilities, but sometimes things did not go as planned. On one particular day, something happened that left me unsettled for a long time afterward. The shoot was scheduled to start at 9 in the morning. Everyone had arrived on time except one actress. She was usually punctual, reliable, and never missed a call. I tried calling her several times, but the phone went straight to voicemail. There was no message or explanation. We decided to push forward without her. The director seemed frustrated but determined to keep the day on schedule. We rearranged scenes to accommodate the missing actress's absence. Some crew members whispered quietly about her disappearance, but nobody really knew what to think. It was not like her to simply vanish without notice. I felt a chill when I realized that something was off. Later in the day, the footage from the previous shoot was reviewed. It was routine, part of our quality control process. The previous shoot had wrapped late the night before, and we usually checked for any errors or issues. When I watched the footage, my heart skipped a beat. The missing actress was still there. She never left. The footage showed her on set, finishing her scenes and then staying on. There were moments when she was just sitting quietly off to the side, watching the others. It was not like her to linger after work was done. She did not pack up her things or say goodbye to anyone, but it was as if she had disappeared into the shadows of the studio. I felt a deep unease as I replayed those moments again and again. How could she be missing if the footage showed her there all along? Had she left the building at all? Nobody had seen her leave, and her phone was still unreachable. Something about this felt more than just a scheduling mishap. I started asking questions. The production manager and I searched the building from top to bottom. Every room, every closet, every corner was checked. There was no sign of her. Her car was still in the parking lot. The front doors were locked and secured. If she had left, it was a mystery how she had done so unnoticed. I began to wonder if anyone else had seen her leave or stay behind. The atmosphere on set grew tense. The crew whispered theories, some joking, others seriously concerned. Had something happened to her between shoots? Was she hiding? Or was there something else going on that no one dared to admit? I could feel eyes on me, as if everyone expected me to find the answers. But I had no clues. That night I stayed late to review more footage, hoping for a hint or explanation. The recording showed her movements clearly. She had not left the studio at all. She simply remained where no one had noticed. At one point, the camera caught her sitting in a corner, looking tired and distant. It was the last image of her on tape. I contacted the police the next day. I gave them all the information and the footage. They arrived quickly and began their investigation. The building was searched thoroughly again. Interviews were conducted with every person on set. It felt like a scene from a movie, but it was terrifyingly real. The missing actress had vanished without a trace. Days passed and there was no sign of her. No phone calls, no messages, no sightings. The mystery deepened. The studio tried to move on with new projects, but the shadow of her disappearance lingered. I could not stop thinking about her last moments caught on film. Why had she stayed behind? What had happened to her after the cameras stopped rolling? One evening I returned to the studio alone. I walked through the quiet halls and empty rooms. The silence was heavy, as if the walls themselves held a secret. I reached the corner where the footage showed her last sitting. The spot felt cold and still. A strange feeling washed over me, as if she was still there waiting. I sat down and closed my eyes. Memories of her laughter and presence flooded my mind. It was hard to believe someone so full of life could disappear without explanation. I realized then that sometimes the most visible things are the easiest to overlook. And the missing actress was a reminder of that fragile truth. In the end, the investigation closed with no answers. The case went cold. The studio moved on, but I never did. I carried the weight of that mystery with me, a silent reminder of the day the footage told a story no one could understand. Sometimes the camera captures more than just images. It captures truths we are not ready to face. Story 3. When I first saw the job listing for a private chef in a secluded estate, it sounded like a dream. The pay was generous, accommodations were included, and the client requested exclusive in-house service. I had worked for some wealthy people before, but this was on another level. The recruiter mentioned discretion was key, and that the employer valued privacy above all. The mansion was nestled in the hills, far from any town. A long, winding road led up to an iron gate, which opened automatically once I arrived. The property was massive, bordered by dense woods and surrounded by high stone walls. It gave off a sense of grandeur, but also an eerie kind of isolation. A tall man greeted me at the front door without a smile. He looked me over in silence and gestured for me to follow him inside. The house was beautiful, filled with expensive art and marble floors that echoed our footsteps. He explained that I would be cooking for the family of 4 and that they had very particular tastes. I was taken to the kitchen, which looked like something out of a high-end culinary school. Fully stocked, with every appliance I could imagine, it seemed like a chef's paradise. I was given a schedule and shown to my room in the staff wing of the mansion. I noticed there were no other staff members around, which felt odd for such a large home. The first few days went smoothly. I prepared meals as requested and delivered them to the dining room, where the family always ate in silence. They never spoke to me directly, only communicated through the tall man who had greeted me. He told me what they wanted and when, and I did as I was told. Despite the lack of interaction, I was content. I had a steady routine, and I was cooking in a beautiful kitchen. But little things began to catch my attention. The windows in my quarters were sealed shut, and my phone had no signal inside the house. I asked the man about the lack of cell reception, and he simply told me the walls were thick and the location remote. When I asked about Wi-Fi, he told me it was not available for staff. Something about the way he said it made me drop the subject. After a week, I started noticing other strange things. There were surveillance cameras everywhere, even in the kitchen and hallways. At night, I heard locks click into place, as if doors were being bolted shut from the outside. I tried to leave my room one night, only to find the door locked. I banged on the door, thinking it was a mistake, but no one answered. The next morning it was unlocked again, and the man acted like nothing had happened. I asked him about it, but he stared at me coldly and said I should not wander at night. From then on, I kept my questions to myself. The family remained distant and silent, always watching but never speaking. They stared at me while I served their food, their eyes following my every move. It was unsettling, but I reminded myself that I needed the money and tried to focus on my work. I began keeping notes in my head, trying to remember details in case I needed to tell someone later. The tall man never left my side when I was outside my room or the kitchen. He followed me everywhere, his presence constant and unnerving. One day I managed to slip away while he was distracted by a phone call. I made my way to the front door, only to find it locked. Every door and window I tried was sealed tight. Panic began to rise in my chest as I realized I was trapped. When the man found me trying to force open a window in the laundry room, his demeanor changed. He did not yell or threaten me. He simply said that I was here for the long term and that my cooperation would make things easier. That night, I cried in my bed, feeling more like a prisoner than an employee. I thought about my family, my friends, and how no one knew where I really was. My phone was still dead, and there was no landline in my room. I had no way to contact the outside world. I started noticing changes in the food I was asked to prepare. Raw meats with strange textures, herbs I had never seen, and instructions to mix ingredients in specific ways. The family began requesting these meals at odd hours, sometimes at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. One night I heard chanting coming from the main dining room. I pressed my ear to the door and listened as low voices echoed through the halls. It sounded ritualistic, and I could hear the clinking of silverware and the shuffle of feet. The next morning the dining room was spotless, and the family looked more drained than usual. Dark circles under their eyes, skin pale and damp. When I served breakfast, the man told me to prepare a new dish with animal organs I had never cooked before. I was disgusted but followed the instructions. It was becoming clear that this job was not just about food. Something sinister was happening in that house, and I was caught in the middle of it. Every time I tried to find a way out, I was blocked. Weeks passed, and my sense of time began to warp. The man stopped pretending to be polite and started issuing orders with a firm, cold tone. I was no longer treated as a guest or even an employee. I was a tool, something to be used. I noticed a room near the basement with a keypad lock. Each time I passed it, I heard low humming sounds and sometimes whispers. I tried to memorize the beeps of the code when the man opened it one day. I replayed the pattern in my head for hours. Late one night, I woke to silence and realized my door was unlocked. My heart pounded as I crept through the hallways, heading for the keypad room. I input the code I thought I had heard, and the light turned green. Inside was a control room filled with monitors. Every room of the mansion was displayed on screens, including mine. Files lined the shelves with names, photos, and notes. Some of the photos showed people who had worked here before, with the word "terminated" stamped across them. I took photos of everything with a hidden camera I had found in the kitchen drawer. I stuffed some documents into my apron and slipped out of the room. As I turned the corner to head back, I ran into the man. He stared at me, his face unreadable. He grabbed my arm tightly and said I had made a mistake. I pulled the pepper jar from my pocket and threw the contents in his eyes. He yelled and staggered back, giving me just enough time to run. I darted through the halls and found an unlocked exit in the garage. I ran barefoot through the woods, the branches cutting my feet, but I did not stop. I ran until I saw the lights of a road. A passing truck stopped when they saw me waving frantically. The driver helped me into the cab and called 911. Police arrived soon after, and I told them everything. It took days of debriefing and questioning before they acted on the information. When they raided the mansion, it was empty. The family and the man had vanished without a trace. The documents and footage I had taken helped launch a federal investigation. They found signs of cult activity, financial fraud, and human trafficking links. I was placed in witness protection for my safety. I still wake up in a cold sweat sometimes, haunted by the memory of their eyes watching me. But I survived. I escaped. And now, with a new name and a new life, I try to rebuild. Or cooking again, but only for those I choose to trust. Story 4. The house was larger than I expected. It sat on the edge of a quiet road, partially hidden behind a row of pines with a wide gravel driveway and a covered porch that looked out over the woods. The man who hired me barely spoke during the interview, just gave me a set of keys and a printed list of chores. He had emphasized privacy and discretion, promising a generous paycheck if I followed the rules. I had nowhere else to go, so I accepted without asking too many questions. Inside, the place was clean but cold, decorated in old-fashioned furniture and faded rugs. My room was on the second floor, simple and neat, with a small window that overlooked the back of the property. I spent the afternoon unpacking and exploring, taking note of where the kitchen supplies were kept and how the laundry machines worked. I did not see much of the man who owned the house after he showed me around. He told me he would be gone most of the time and preferred to be left alone when home. As night fell, the house grew quiet in a way that made every creak of the floorboards feel loud. I found myself checking the locks twice before heading to bed, uneasy but unsure why. It was not fear exactly, more like a weight pressing against my chest, something unspoken lingering in the air. I told myself it was just nerves. A new job, a strange place, too much silence. I could not sleep. The mattress was firm, The blanket's clean, but my eyes refused to close for long. Around 11, I heard a sound like something heavy dragging against concrete. It came from below the floorboards, slow and rhythmic, then stopped. At first, I thought I imagined it, but then it came again. Curiosity got the better of me. I slipped out of bed and grabbed a flashlight from the drawer. The main hallway was dark, except for the small nightlight near the stairs. I walked softly, listening for any other noise, but everything was still now. When I reached the kitchen, I paused because I realized I had no idea where the cellar door was. I searched along the baseboards until I found a narrow door behind the pantry shelf. It was locked with a heavy padlock, but the ring of keys I had included one that fit. The lock clicked open louder than I liked. The door creaked as I opened it, revealing steep wooden steps leading down into darkness. The air grew colder with every step. I kept the flashlight pointed ahead, the beam cutting through the shadows to reveal stone walls and shelves stacked with old jars and boxes. It looked like a normal cellar at first, but then I heard it again, that dragging sound, followed by a faint moan. I turned the light and caught sight of something near the far wall. A figure, half hidden behind an old shelf, crouched low with hands bound in chains that ran through a bolt in the floor. She looked up when the light hit her, squinting like she had not seen brightness in days. Her clothes were torn, her skin bruised, and her eyes wide with terror. I froze, unsure what to say or do. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. She shook her head frantically, whispering something I could not hear. I stepped closer, and she started crying. That broke me out of my shock. I knelt beside her and tried to examine the chains. They were thick and rusted, locked with a padlock that did not match any key on my ring. I asked her who she was, but she only whispered please over and over again. Her wrists were raw from where the metal rubbed against her skin. I promised her I would help. I ran back upstairs and searched every drawer in the house. I found an old toolbox in the garage and grabbed the heaviest bolt cutters I could carry. Back in the cellar, I tried the lock, but it would not give. I tried sawing through the chain, but the angle was bad and the sound made her flinch. I told her to hang on, that I would call the police. But the phone in the kitchen had no dial tone. My cell phone, which worked fine earlier, showed no service. I tried walking out to the driveway, but the air was thick and heavy, and the trees seemed to crowd closer around the house. I thought about driving to town, but the man's car was still parked in the garage, and I realized mine was locked in by the gate, which I now noticed was chained shut from the outside. Panic started to set in. I could not leave. I could not call for help. I went back down and sat with the woman, trying to keep her calm while I figured out what to do. I asked her how long she had been down here, but she only shook her head and whispered that he would come back soon. That was when I heard the front door open upstairs. Footsteps moved across the floor above us, slow and deliberate. I turned off the flashlight and crouched beside her in the dark, barely breathing. The footsteps paused near the kitchen, then moved toward the pantry. The door to the cellar creaked open again, and I could hear him coming down the stairs. I grabbed a piece of broken wood from the floor and waited. When his shadow appeared on the final step, I swung. The hit landed against his arm, and he stumbled back with a grunt. I pushed past him and ran. I had no plan, just pure fear propelling me up the stairs and toward the garage. I remembered the toolbox and grabbed a wrench this time. He followed me, slower now, probably dazed. I ducked behind the workbench and waited until he got close, then hit him again. This time he went down hard. I tied his hands with the extension cord and ran back to the cellar. It took time, but I finally cut through the chain. She was too weak to walk, so I helped her up the stairs, one step at a time. We made it to the car, and I found the remote to open the gate hanging from the visor. As soon as the gate creaked open, I drove. I did not stop until I saw a gas station, and from there I called 911. The police met us minutes later. They arrested the man from the house without a struggle. The woman was taken to the hospital, and I gave my statement to the officers. I stayed with her until her family was contacted. She had been missing for months. In the weeks that followed, I tried to forget, but it stayed with me. Her face, the sound of those chains, the cold air of the cellar. I was offered counseling and took it. I also got a new job, nothing fancy but quiet and safe. Sometimes I still hear the sound of dragging chains in my dreams, but I sleep better now knowing she is free. I never went back to that house, and I never planned to. Whatever darkness lived there, it lost its grip the night she and I walked away. Story 5. He told me from the start that he liked things a little rough. I was not exactly innocent when it came to that kind of stuff, so I nodded and told him I was okay with it. Our first few nights together were passionate but intense, filled with biting, scratching, and a bit of choking. It was never anything too far beyond the edge, at least not at first. I trusted him because he was always careful to stop when I said so. But over time, though, the intensity began to rise. He started pushing limits that I had not agreed to push. Sometimes he would slap me without warning, or press his hand on my throat just a little too long. I would pull away and say something, and he would laugh it off like I was being dramatic. I told myself he was just playing and that he did not mean any harm. It is easy to ignore red flags when you think you are in love. I kept telling myself that he would never truly hurt me. He was always sweet and affectionate outside of the bedroom. He opened doors for me, brought me coffee in the mornings, and kissed my forehead when I was tired. But behind closed doors, things felt different, darker, even if I could not say why. I found myself flinching when he got too close sometimes. My friends noticed the bruises and I made excuses. I told them we got carried away or that it was consensual. That was mostly true, at least at the beginning. Still, a small voice inside me was growing louder, telling me something was off. The change came when I was looking for his phone charger one night. He was asleep, snoring lightly, and I didn't want to wake him. I opened the drawer in his nightstand and saw it sitting right on top. But underneath the charger was something I was never meant to find. It was a folder filled with newspaper clippings, printed photos, and a flash drive. My stomach twisted as I flipped through the pages. The headlines told me more than I wanted to know. One article was about a woman who had died during what authorities called a consensual encounter gone wrong. Her bruises looked eerily similar to mine. I stared at her photo, feeling the blood drain from my face. She was smiling in the picture, so full of life, probably just like I had been. The story described how her partner had claimed it was an accident, that she liked things rough and it had gone too far. But he had disappeared before police could question him again. I looked closer at the grainy photo of the man and felt my breath catch. It was him. A little younger, his hair shorter, but it was him. I dropped the folder back into the drawer and shut it quickly, hoping the sound would not wake him. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I climbed into bed and lay stiff beside him until the morning light crept through the window. The next day I tried to act normal, but my mind was racing. I watched him carefully, trying to spot any cracks in his mask. Every smile he gave me felt forced. Every touch made my skin crawl. I could not confront him without proof, but I also could not pretend everything was fine. That folder haunted me every time I looked at him. When he left for work, I grabbed the flash drive and went to my friend's house. She had a laptop and helped me open the files. Most of them were harmless photos and documents, but one folder was locked with a password. I guessed at a few things until I tried the name from one of the articles. It opened. Inside were videos. Some were of us, which made my skin crawl. But there were others. I could only watch one before I felt like I was going to throw up. It was her, the girl from the article. And it was him, doing things to her that no one should ever do. I backed away from the screen, hands shaking. My friend looked just as pale as I felt. We knew we had to go to the police. There was no more room for doubt. This was not a misunderstanding or a rough night gone too far. This was a crime. At the station, I handed over everything. They took it seriously right away. The detective asked me questions about our relationship and his behavior. I told them everything, from the first night to the folder in the drawer. They told me I had done the right thing. He was arrested 2 days later. I had to go into hiding for a while because they feared he might try to find me if he made bail. But he never did. The evidence was too strong. The videos were enough to put him away for a long time. I testified at his trial. It was one of the hardest things I have ever done. I had to watch some of those videos again, had to explain every bruise, every scream. But I got through it, and in the end, the jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to life, no chance of parole. I cried when the verdict was read, but they were tears of relief. I was finally free. He could never touch me again. It took time to feel safe again. Some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, dreaming he is standing over me. But those dreams are getting fewer. I started going to therapy and slowly began to trust again. Not just others, but myself. The scariest part was realizing how easily I could have become her. How close I had come to being another headline. But I made it out. I listened to that voice in my head when it mattered most. And because of that, I am still here. I do not blame myself for staying as long as I did. Love can blind you to danger. But I also know now that real love never feels like fear. Real love does not leave bruises or make you question your worth. I am learning what real love is, and it starts with me. He is behind bars where he belongs. I walk a little taller knowing that. The darkness he carried is not mine to hold anymore. I am free, and I will never let anyone take that from me again. Story 6. I had been on the site for weeks, chatting with people who seemed like-minded and respectful. When I received an invitation to a private party, the message was polite, confident, and full of reassurances. It was described as a kink-friendly event, one where discretion was paramount and boundaries were strictly honored. After exchanging more messages and confirming safety protocols, I allowed myself to feel a little excited. The address was for a large house on the outskirts of the city, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. I arrived just after 9 p.m., dressed according to the host's suggested code. The exterior looked normal, maybe even charming, with soft lighting and a freshly trimmed lawn. A tall man at the door checked my ID and smiled as he welcomed me in. Inside, the house was dimly lit, with music playing at a low volume. There were a few other guests mingling, drinks in hand, wearing masks or outfits that hinted at their preferred roles. Nothing seemed out of place at first. I was handed a drink by a woman who introduced herself using a safe word as part of the greeting, and I took that as another sign that this was legitimate. We were told to leave our phones in a locked box in the foyer for privacy. I hesitated but noticed everyone else complying without question. I reminded myself I had done my research and spoken to the host extensively. I placed my phone inside the padded container and secured it with the provided code. A woman in a red robe led us into what she called the consent circle. There, we were encouraged to state our boundaries and comfort levels. Each person gave a short statement, and the host repeated that consent was ongoing and could be revoked at any time. It felt organized, structured, and safe. After the circle, we were split into smaller groups based on shared interests. I followed my group to a lounge downstairs that was softly lit with candles and covered in cushions and curtains. There was gentle music, and the mood felt calm. The host reappeared and offered us a new round of drinks, smiling as he walked among us. I only took a few sips of the second drink before I started feeling strange. My head grew heavy, and my limbs felt too light, almost like I was floating in place. I tried to speak, but the words came out thick and slow. Others around me seemed affected too, their heads lolling or their movements growing sluggish. Panic began to rise in me, but I could barely lift my arms. One woman collapsed beside me, her eyes wide and unfocused. I tried to get to my feet but crumpled back onto the cushions. The last thing I remember clearly was the host kneeling in front of me with a kind smile brushing hair from my face. When I woke up, it was morning. I was in a small, windowless room with a concrete floor and a metal door. My clothes were gone, replaced with a plain cotton shift. I had no idea how long I had been out. My throat was dry, and my head pounded. The door opened, and a woman entered carrying a clipboard. She asked me how I felt, as if I were in a hospital. I asked where I was, but she ignored the question and said I had been selected for a different kind of experience. I could barely process her words. The next few days blurred together. I was kept in that room, given small meals, and monitored constantly. They asked me questions that made no sense, like what I believed about control, about obedience, about pain. Each answer I gave seemed to lead to another round of questioning or some kind of strange reward or punishment. I was not the only one there. Sometimes I would hear others screaming or crying through the walls. Once I caught a glimpse of a man being led down the hall in chains, his eyes hollow and lost. The woman with the clipboard always spoke in the same calm tone, never reacting to my pleas or anger. I began to wonder if I would ever leave. Every time I asked to go, I was told I was not ready yet. They said I had not completed my transformation. I tried to resist their games, their questions, but the lack of sleep and constant manipulation wore me down. One night, a different woman came into my room. She whispered that she had once been in my place. She told me there was a way out, but it would only come if I pretended to comply. She said they were always watching, and that I had to make them believe I was broken. I started playing along. I smiled when they entered, answered their questions with the responses I thought they wanted. I acted compliant, even when every part of me wanted to scream. Slowly, I was moved to a different area of the building with more freedom. The new space had a communal area where we could interact, always under supervision. I kept up my act, and eventually I met another person who had the same plan. They had been pretending longer than I had. Together we watched, waited, and mapped out patterns in the guards' movements. One afternoon, the power went out. The lights flickered and then died completely. Alarms buzzed in the distance, and I felt a surge of hope. My companion grabbed my hand and we ran down a service hallway we had seen unlocked once before. There was chaos all around. We made it to a back exit, one that led into a field overgrown with weeds and scattered trash. I did not stop running until I saw a road. A car slowed when I flagged it down, and the driver, seeing my state, called 911. I collapsed as soon as I heard the dispatcher's voice. At the hospital, they treated me for dehydration and exhaustion. Police questioned me, but it took time for them to believe everything I said. Look, I gave them every detail I remembered, even though it made me feel sick to speak it aloud. Eventually, they raided the house and found what was left. Some of the others were still there, including the host. He was calm when arrested, like none of this mattered. The news reported it as a cult-like operation disguised as private events. Dozens of victims were identified, many of whom had been missing for years. I went through months of therapy. The nightmares took longer to fade. But I survived. I never blamed myself, not fully, because the trap was too carefully made, too perfectly designed to lure people in. Now I speak to others about what happened. Quietly, carefully, but with purpose. I work with organizations that help survivors and expose dangerous groups like the one I escaped from. Every time someone listens, I feel a little stronger. I know now that I was not the first, but I made sure I was the last. Story 7. I had always been self-conscious about my appearance. For years, I saved money, skipped vacations, and denied myself small pleasures so I could finally afford the procedure. A popular clinic overseas caught my attention with its glowing reviews and discreet services. I booked a consultation, packed my bags, and boarded a flight filled with both excitement and dread. When I arrived, a representative met me at the airport holding a simple sign with my name on it. They did not speak much, only nodding and guiding me into a sleek black vehicle. The drive took longer than expected, and I lost track of where we were. The scenery gradually changed from busy streets to quiet, winding roads lined with tall trees. Eventually, we pulled up to a building that looked more like a private residence than a medical facility. The exterior was pristine, modern, and minimalist, with no signage. I asked questions, but the driver remained silent and gestured for me to go inside. My stomach churned with nerves, but I reminded myself that high-end clinics often operated with strict privacy. Inside, the reception area was spotless and quiet, the lighting soft and calming. A woman in a white coat greeted me and handed me a clipboard with forms to fill out. I noticed that none of the paperwork mentioned a clinic name or location. It felt strange, but I pushed the thought aside and completed the forms. After the paperwork, I was shown to a private room and told to rest. The room was simple but comfortable, with no windows. I laid down, and a nurse came in to place an IV into my arm. I asked when the surgery would be, but she only smiled and said everything would be taken care of soon. The last thing I remembered was the sensation of drifting off as the anesthesia took hold. There were no vivid dreams, only a sudden jolt when I woke up again. I was in a different room now, dimly lit and cooler than before. My body felt heavy, and I could sense bandages wrapped tightly around my face. I reached up to touch the bandages, but my arms felt sluggish. A machine nearby beeped softly, and a nurse appeared almost immediately. She told me not to move and assured me that everything had gone well. Her voice was flat, rehearsed, and devoid of warmth. I asked what time it was, but she did not answer. I asked where I was, and she turned and left the room without a word. The air in the room felt thick, almost stale, and I noticed there were no clocks, no windows, and no signs of other patients. The walls were bare, painted in a dull shade of gray. The next time someone entered, it was another nurse I had not seen before. He checked my vitals, scribbled something on a clipboard, and avoided eye contact. I tried to sit up, but he gently pushed me back down. He muttered that the doctor would see me soon and quickly left the room. Days passed, or at least I assumed they had. It was impossible to track time in that place. Our meals were brought in at regular intervals, but no one spoke to me beyond short, scripted phrases. I still had no idea where I was or who had operated on me. Eventually, the bandages were removed. A mirror was brought in, and I was left alone with it. My reflection looked different, almost too different. I could not recognize myself fully, even though I knew the procedures I had requested. There was a strange tightness in my jaw and around my eyes. My features were symmetrical, too perfect in some unnatural way. I touched my face and felt smooth skin beneath my fingertips, but it felt foreign. The person staring back at me could have been a stranger. I pressed the call button and waited for someone to come. When the nurse arrived, I demanded to know the name of the doctor and the location of the clinic. She stared at me blankly and repeated that I was recovering well and should not stress myself. I grabbed her arm, but she slipped away quickly and exited the room. That was the moment I knew something was deeply wrong. I got up and tried to leave my room, but the door was locked from the outside. I banged on it, shouted, and even tried to break the handle, but it was solid and unyielding. No one came, not even to ask me to quiet down. Later, I found a small vent near the ceiling and climbed onto the bed to peer through it. I could hear voices from another room, hushed and hurried. Words like subject and transfer were spoken, sending chills through me. I backed away, heart racing, realizing I might not be a patient but something else. When I woke the next morning, my room had changed. My belongings were gone, and in their place was a new set of clothes. A note lay on the bed, written in perfect script, stating that I was ready for the next stage. I tore the note to pieces and began searching for another way out. Eventually, I discovered a panel in the bathroom that came loose when I tugged hard enough. Behind it was a narrow crawl space leading into darkness. I hesitated, but staying felt worse than the unknown. I squeezed through, crawling on my hands and knees, scraping against metal and dust. After what felt like hours, I emerged into a dim hallway with flickering lights. The walls were lined with doors, each marked only by a number. I moved quietly, trying handles, listening for sounds. Some rooms were empty, others occupied by people in various states of sedation. I wanted to help them, but I knew I could not help anyone if I got caught. I kept moving until I found a door marked exit. I pushed it open and was met with the cold night air and a dense forest surrounding the building. There were no roads, no lights, no sign of civilization. I ran blindly through the trees, driven by panic and desperation. The branches tore at my clothes and skin, but I did not stop. Hours later, I stumbled onto a dirt path and followed it until I reached a small village. The people there stared at me strangely, whispering as I passed. I found someone who spoke a little English and convinced them to let me use their phone. I called the embassy and explained my situation as best I could. They sent someone to retrieve me the next day, but even they could not identify the clinic from my description. It simply did not exist on any map. Back home, I tried to trace the clinic online, but the website had vanished. The contact numbers were disconnected, and the email bounced back undelivered. My bank could not trace the payment, and there was no record of the transaction. It was as if the entire experience had been erased. The changes to my face remained, though. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a version of myself that felt manufactured. People complimented my appearance, not knowing the horror behind it. I smiled politely, but inside I was haunted by the place that had taken more than just my old face. I eventually learned to live with the reflection, to accept what had been done. But I never stopped searching, hoping to find the clinic and understand what had really happened. Each lead brought only dead ends and more questions. Still, I kept looking. Then one day, years later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a photo of me taken the day I arrived at the clinic. On the back, a single sentence was written: "You were never meant to leave." I burned the letter and the photo, watching the flames consume the final proof. I knew then that some places were never meant to be found again. And some transformations change far more than the surface. Story 8. I was desperate for cash. Rent was overdue and my fridge was practically empty. My job barely covered my bills, and my side hustles were drying up. Every day felt like a new kind of panic. I was constantly calculating how many days I had left before everything caved in. One night, while scrolling through job ads, I found something strange. It promised quick, easy money for a few hours of work. The post was vague but intriguing, just enough to make me pause. It mentioned a private film, nothing explicit in the description, only that it was high-paying and confidential. My mind hesitated, but my empty wallet pushed me forward. I emailed the contact and got a response in less than an hour. The message was polite, professional even, and asked me to come for a short meeting. It said the job was not illegal, and I could walk away at any time. I told myself it was probably something weird but harmless. My gut twisted as I agreed to meet the next afternoon. The place was in a quiet part of town, a small office in a business complex. It looked normal, even boring, which helped calm my nerves. Inside, a man greeted me with a clipboard and a kind smile. He explained that the project was for a niche audience, filmed privately, and that my face could be blurred if I chose. All I had to do was follow a script and act a certain way. The amount they offered was more than I made in 2 months. I tried not to look too eager as I signed the release form. They asked if I was sure, and I nodded, repeating to myself that it was just acting. I could pretend, play a part, and then walk away with enough money to breathe again. It felt like a lifeline, even if it was an unusual one. The film shoot happened the next day in a well-lit studio with a basic set. There was nothing outright disturbing, but it was definitely personal, awkward. I had to say and do things that made me uncomfortable, but the crew remained distant and professional. I kept reminding myself of the money. When it was over, they handed me an envelope filled with cash and thanked me for my time. Walking home, I told myself I had done what I needed to do. I could finally pay rent, stock up on groceries, and maybe have a bit left for emergencies. I deleted the contact information and tried to put it behind me, but something about it lingered in my mind. The feeling that I had crossed a line I could not uncross. Weeks went by and I started to feel normal again. I paid off some debts and even managed to smile more often. Life was not perfect, but it was better than before. Then one evening, I received an anonymous message. There was a short clip attached to it. My heart froze when I saw myself on screen. It was part of the private film, but with my face clearly visible. The message was short and terrifying. Pay or we send this to everyone you know. My stomach dropped as I stared at the screen, unable to move. I thought it had been confidential. I had trusted them when they said I could remain anonymous. Now I was facing the threat of humiliation, of losing everything I had managed to rebuild. I replied with shaky fingers, asking what they wanted. The answer came almost immediately. They wanted 5 times what I had been paid. If I did not send it within 3 days, they said they would share the video online and with people close to me. I was filled with dread. I did not have that kind of money. And even if I did, what would stop them from coming back again? I started to panic. I barely slept that night, replaying the video in my mind over and over again. I thought about going to the police, but the shame held me back. I imagined the questions they would ask, the looks I would get. I had no proof, just a message and a video of myself I should have never made. The next morning, I tried to call the number from the original contact. It was disconnected. I searched for the company name but found nothing. It was like they had never existed. My hands trembled as I realized how careful they had been. I was trapped, and they knew it. By the second day, I decided to confide in someone. I picked someone I trusted, someone who had been through hard times like me. I told them everything, ashamed and broken. They listened without judgment and said something I had not considered, or fight back. Larson. They helped me document everything. Screenshots, timestamps, the video, the messages. We created a timeline and gathered what little evidence we had. Then we contacted a local advocacy group that dealt with online exploitation. They took me seriously and offered help. With their guidance, I filed a police report. It was terrifying, but I felt less alone. The officers treated me with respect and care. They said that blackmail cases like this were becoming more common. It gave me hope that I might not be ruined by this. Within a few weeks, they traced the messages back to a location out of state. It turned out I was not the only one who had been targeted. Others had come forward, and the investigation grew. They had been running a scheme, luring desperate people into these films and then extorting them. I felt a mix of relief and anger. Eventually, they were caught. The people behind the scheme were arrested, and the videos were removed from every platform they had appeared on. I received official notice that I would not be held responsible for anything, and that I was considered a victim, not a criminal. I cried when I read the letter. It felt like I could finally start over. Now I talk to others about what happened. I tell them to be careful, to ask questions, and never let desperation make decisions for them. What I went through was painful, but it taught me how to fight for myself. I am no longer ashamed of my past. I survived it, and that means more than anything. Life is not perfect, but it is mine again. I have a job that I like, a few trusted people by my side, and a sense of strength I never knew I had. I no longer wake up in fear. That chapter of my life is closed, and I refuse to let it define me. I chose to rise instead. Story 9. Most people think working for a dating app is about sifting through profile pictures and reading awkward bios, but that is just the surface. My job was a little darker. I was part of the team that ran background checks before profiles could go live. We combed through public records, criminal histories, and social media footprints to make sure no one with a dangerous past could sneak through. It was repetitive, methodical work, but I believed it made a difference. Sometimes I would see things that made my stomach turn. Assault charges, restraining orders, or active warrants were more common than most users would like to believe. When we found something serious, the profile was flagged, and our internal security team would take over. Those cases usually ended quietly, and I never learned what happened after the alert was sent. That distance was comforting, necessary even. I had gotten good at separating the work from my emotions. You cannot afford to feel too much when you are constantly staring at people's worst mistakes. Most profiles passed inspection with nothing more than minor traffic violations or old college pranks. But I never let my guard down. One mistake could mean someone's safety was compromised. It started like any other afternoon. I was halfway through my queue and sipping lukewarm coffee that I had reheated twice already. A new profile came up with the usual bright photo and carefully written self-summary. Nothing about it stood out at first. Then I saw the face and felt my heart stop. It was a woman I had seen before, but not in a dating profile. I could not place it immediately, but there was something deeply familiar about her. I opened a second window and began cross-referencing her name, even though the profile showed no red flags. That nagging feeling in my chest would not go away. Something about her smile looked off, forced, like she was hiding behind it. After about 15 minutes of digging, I found it. A missing persons report filed 6 months earlier, complete with the same photo now used in her profile. The name on the report matched, but the last known location was across the country. She had vanished without a trace while walking home from work. Authorities had no leads. My hands trembled as I clicked through the public report. There was nothing to suggest she had left willingly. No signs of depression or distress. The police suspected foul play, but no suspects had ever been named. Seeing her face again on a dating app felt unreal, like something out of a movie. I double-checked the user data in our system. Whoever had made the profile was using a different city and a new phone number, but the email address was barely altered. Just one letter different. It was subtle, clever, enough to fool most filters, but not someone who had been staring at profiles every day for years. The account had just been created earlier that morning. That meant whoever set it up was probably still monitoring it. I flagged the profile immediately and alerted my supervisor. Usually that would be the end of it for me, but I could not let it go. I needed to know what was happening. That night I could not sleep. My mind kept returning to her face and the dozens of unanswered questions. Was she alive and trying to make contact? Or had someone stolen her identity for something worse? I knew I had no authority to investigate, but something inside me refused to let it go. The next day, I came in early and checked the flagged profile again. It had not been taken down yet, which meant our security team was still reviewing it. I requested an internal note update, hoping someone would provide context. All it said was pending further verification. That was not enough. I reached out to a contact I had from an old training seminar. He worked in law enforcement and owed me a favor from a previous case where our background check helped catch a fugitive. I sent him the profile and the missing persons report, keeping it as vague and professional as I could. Within minutes he responded, asking me to call him. When I did, his voice was grim. He told me the case had gone cold months ago and that the family had all but given up hope. They had suspected she might have been abducted, but there was never any evidence to support that theory. He said the information I sent would be forwarded to the original detective. He thanked me and promised to keep me updated. A few days passed with no news. The profile had been quietly removed from the app, and the username no longer existed in our database. Most of my coworkers never knew anything unusual had happened. But I kept checking the missing persons database, hoping for any update. I told myself I was just being thorough. Finally, almost a week later, I got a call from my contact. He said the original detective had traced the IP address used to create the dating profile. It was from a rural town several hundred miles from where the woman had disappeared. Local authorities were sent to the location tied to the registration. What they found shocked everyone. It was a small cabin, isolated and overgrown with trees. Inside, they found the woman alive, but in terrible condition. She had been held captive all this time. Her abductor had apparently grown careless, allowing her access to an old laptop. She had tried to create a dating profile as a cry for help, hoping someone might recognize her face. It was a desperate gamble. She was taken to a hospital and reunited with her family. The man who had taken her was arrested without incident. He had no previous record, no history of violence. Just a quiet loner with a dark secret. The authorities believed he had let his guard down out of arrogance or boredom. That mistake saved her life. I did not tell anyone at work about what had happened. There were no congratulations or dramatic announcements. It was better that way. The job was meant to be invisible, silent in its service. Still, I could not stop thinking about her. The courage it must have taken to create that profile, knowing it might be her only chance. The trust she had to place in total strangers to see her in act. I felt honored to have played a small part in her rescue. Now, when I go through profiles, I do it with a little more patience and a sharper eye. Every face could hold a story I do not know yet. Every detail could mean more than it seems. The work is still routine, still thankless. But I know now that sometimes it saves lives. Story 10. I was cleaning out my laptop one night when I stumbled across a folder I had not opened in years. It was buried under layers of other junk, hidden with a name only I would recognize. Curiosity got the better of me, so I clicked through it. Old photos, saved messages, and videos began loading. As I watched them flash across my screen, the pit in my stomach grew. He had recorded everything. Some of it I remembered consenting to. Some of it I absolutely did not. But what scared me more than the content was the memory of what he had said when we broke up. He had threatened to leak those videos if I ever spoke about what he did to me. I never believed he would follow through. He liked control, not exposure. He wanted me afraid, not free. And for a long time I lived that way. Quiet, careful, paranoid. Eventually, life went on. I got a new apartment, a better job, and slowly rebuilt my confidence. I dated again, cautiously at first, and I let myself believe I had escaped the worst of him. That folder should have been a reminder, but I closed it and tried to move on. Weeks later, I was at work during a quiet afternoon lull. A friend sent me a link to a bizarre website she stumbled upon late at night. It was one of those places people only whispered about, where videos got uploaded anonymously. She warned me it was disturbing, and I should not watch too much. I opened the link out of boredom more than interest. The layout was crude, almost outdated. Categories flashed across the top in bold, disorganized rows. I hovered over one labeled Private Confessions. A part of me clicked it just to see how ridiculous it could be. The screen loaded a series of thumbnails. The faces were often blurred, but I could tell some were not. Some were shot in obvious secrecy. And then my breath caught. One of the thumbnails looked too familiar. The walls, the sheets, even the light filtering through the blinds. I clicked it, heart pounding. The video started, and there I was. Not just once, but in full detail. Clear audio, the date stamp in the corner. It was one of the recordings from that folder, but I had never seen it edited that way. It had been trimmed, cut to make me look like I was doing something I wasn't. I slammed my laptop shut and stared at the wall. The floor beneath me may as well have vanished. I could not cry, not yet. My mind went blank, then raced with questions. Who else had seen this? How long had it been online? I forced myself to reopen the computer. I searched the site for more videos. There were 5 in total. All me. All taken at different times. Some when I knew, some when I did not. All uploaded by the same anonymous user. My hands shook as I searched the username across the internet. It led me to nothing useful. No profiles, no traces, just that one site. I took screenshots, saved the URLs, and began gathering everything I could. I knew I would have to go to the police. Walking into the station, I felt like I was walking into a courtroom naked. The shame, the fear, it clung to me. But I knew I could not let him win. I explained everything to the officer on duty, and she nodded patiently. She asked me to sit while she brought someone from cybercrime. The detective who arrived seemed skeptical at first. He asked if I had any proof the videos were not consented to. I showed him the clips, pointed out the timestamps, the places I never knew a camera had been. He grew quieter as he reviewed the evidence. They took my statement and said an investigation would begin. I was told not to expect fast results. These cases could take months, sometimes longer. But I was not waiting anymore. I contacted a lawyer, one who specialized in digital privacy violations. She promised she would do everything to push the case forward. I also started therapy. I needed to. The sense of betrayal, of being violated all over again, was too heavy to carry alone. The therapist helped me understand what I could not control, and what I could. Most importantly, she reminded me I still had power, even if it had been taken from me before. As the months went by, progress was slow but steady. The videos were taken down, though not before I sent several cease and desist letters. My lawyer managed to trace the payments from the site to a bank account. It was a small lead, but it cracked open the case. Eventually they found him. He had sold the videos using a fake name and redirected the profits through a digital wallet. The transaction history tied directly back to his real identity. When the police knocked on his door, he still had copies of the videos on his hard drive. He had even uploaded a few under another account. He was arrested and charged. The case went public. I did not want my name in the news, and thankfully, the court respected that. But he faced consequences, real ones. He was convicted for digital voyeurism and distribution without consent. I attended every court session. I stared straight ahead as he avoided my eyes. For once, he was not in control. He had always been so careful, so manipulative, thinking he would never get caught. But he did, because I refused to stay silent. After the sentencing, I walked out of that courthouse with a quiet kind of relief. It was not total peace, but it was something close. I changed my number, upgraded all my devices, and erased the folder from my laptop for good. This time, not out of fear, out of finality. People tell you healing is a straight line, but it is not. It comes in moments, in waves, in small victories. Mine came the day I looked in the mirror and saw someone who fought back. Someone who survived. Someone who reclaimed what had been taken. I never thought I would be the kind of person who went through something like this. But I did, and I came out stronger than I imagined possible. Not because I was fearless, but because I was tired of being afraid. And I learned that courage, real courage, is quiet and persistent and burns even in the darkest places. Story 11. Ion. I checked into a love motel with someone I met while on vacation. We had spent the day exploring the city, sharing stories and laughing like old friends. The chemistry between us was undeniable, and when he suggested we get a room for the night, I agreed without hesitation. The motel was cheap but clean, tucked away on a quiet street just far enough from the main tourist areas. I thought it was just going to be a brief, exciting adventure before returning to the familiar routine of my trip. The room was small but cozy, with a flickering neon sign visible through the window casting a strange glow on the walls. We talked for a while after checking in, our voices low and the atmosphere charged with anticipation. When the night grew late, we finally gave in to the moment, believing this could be the start of something new. I fell asleep feeling safe, comforted by the warmth beside me. It was a feeling I had not expected to have on this trip. When I woke up, the room was empty except for me. The man I came with was gone without a trace. I reached for my passport, which I always kept close, only to find the spot where it had been was now empty. A cold wave of panic hit me as I realized what had happened. I was alone in a strange room in a strange city, and my identification was missing. As I tried to process what was going on, I noticed movement in the corner of the room. My heart jumped as I saw someone else was there with me. It was a woman, her eyes wide and frightened, clutching a small bag to her chest. She seemed just as confused and scared as I was. Neither of us spoke at first, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. I asked her how she ended up here, and she told me a story that sounded eerily similar to mine. She had met a man while traveling, someone who promised her fun and safety, but instead left her stranded and vulnerable. She said she woke up just like I did, without her belongings and without any idea where the man had gone. It was clear we had both been victims of the same person. We quickly realized that if we wanted to get out of this situation, we needed to work together. We searched the room for clues, hoping to find something that might help us understand what was happening. The bathroom mirror had smudges that looked like hurried writing, and there was a faint smell of cigarette smoke in the air. It felt like the place had been used by someone who did not want to be found. With no phones and no passport, our options felt limited. We decided to check the motel lobby, hoping to find someone who could help us. The clerk was there, but his expression changed when he saw us. He told us the man had paid cash and left early in the morning, refusing to give any contact information. He seemed nervous, as if he knew more than he was letting on. We pressed him for details, and he finally admitted there had been rumors about a man who used the motel to trick travelers into leaving their passports behind. Some said he worked with others who used the documents to disappear or commit crimes. The clerk warned us to be careful and suggested we go to the police immediately. Hearing this only made us more determined to get out safely. Outside the motel, we found a public phone booth and called the local police. Explaining the situation was difficult because of language barriers, but eventually they understood. Officers arrived quickly and took our statements. They promised to investigate the man in the motel thoroughly. For the first time since waking up alone, I felt a sliver of hope. The police escorted us to a nearby safe place where we could rest and recover, and they arranged for temporary identification papers through the embassy so we could continue our trip or return home. The woman and I stayed close during this time, finding comfort in each other's company. We shared stories and fears, becoming unlikely friends bonded by an awful experience. Days later, the police contacted us with news that the man had been caught. He had been running a ring that exploited travelers by stealing their passports and using their identities. The investigation revealed many victims, and our cooperation had helped bring him to justice. It was a relief to know we were not alone in this and that the nightmare was finally over. But although the ordeal left scars, I refused to let it define me. I decided to continue my travels, but with greater caution and awareness. I learned how important it was to trust my instincts and to never ignore small warning signs. The experience taught me resilience and the strength that comes from facing fear head-on. In the end, what began as a frightening situation turned into a lesson in survival and friendship. I was grateful for the unexpected support of the woman I met in that motel room. Together, we had turned a nightmare into a story of hope and courage. I knew that no matter where I went next, I would carry that strength with me, ready to face whatever came my way. Story 12. I had just started seeing a man I met a few weeks earlier. Our conversations were easy, and the connection felt natural. When he suggested a weekend trip to a remote cabin, I hesitated at first, but then agreed. The idea of getting away from the city and spending time together sounded exciting. I packed lightly, not knowing what to expect. We arrived at the cabin late Friday afternoon. It was nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by tall trees and silence. The air smelled fresh and cool, a welcome change from the noise of the city. The cabin itself was charming, rustic, but cozy, with a wood-burning stove and large windows. I felt a sense of peace settle over me as I stepped inside. He showed me around the cabin, pointing out the kitchen, the living room, and the bedrooms upstairs. The place was neat and well-maintained, everything in its place. We talked about our plans for the weekend, mostly about hiking and relaxing. The thought of spending 2 days in such a quiet place was comforting. I started to feel more at ease with him. That night, after dinner, we settled in the living room by the fire. We talked and laughed, sharing stories about our pasts and dreams for the future. The warmth of the fire and the glow of the candles made the room feel intimate. I noticed the walls were unusually thick and there was no sound from outside. The cabin was completely silent except for our voices. The next morning I woke early and went to explore the cabin on my own. I walked through the rooms, enjoying the quiet and the soft light coming through the windows. When I reached the bedroom, I noticed something odd. Under the bed, there was a small box. Curiosity got the better of me, so I pulled it out carefully. Inside the box were a pair of handcuffs. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at them for a moment, trying to understand what they were doing there. I felt a mix of confusion and unease. Why would anyone keep handcuffs under the bed? I wondered if it was some kind of joke or a forgotten prop. When he came into the room, I showed him the handcuffs. His reaction surprised me. He smiled and explained that the cabin was soundproof, designed for privacy and discretion. The handcuffs, he said, were part of a playful side of his personality. He wanted to make sure I was comfortable and safe, promising that nothing would happen without my consent. Still, I felt a knot in my stomach. The silence of the cabin suddenly felt heavier, and the walls seemed to close in. I asked more questions about the soundproofing, wanting to understand why it was there. He said it was to prevent noise from disturbing neighbors, but I sensed there was more to the story. Despite my doubts, I decided to stay. I told myself that trust was important in any relationship, especially new ones. We spent the day hiking nearby trails, enjoying the fresh air and beautiful scenery. The natural world outside was a stark contrast to the strange atmosphere inside the cabin. But that evening, as the sun set, we returned to the cabin. The silence greeted us like an old friend, thick and impenetrable. We talked about boundaries and expectations, trying to be open with each other. I felt torn between curiosity and caution. The handcuffs remained on my mind, a symbol of something I did not fully understand. Before going to bed, I asked if I could lock the bedroom door from the inside. He agreed without hesitation. The cabin's isolation made me want to feel safe and in control. I curled up under the blankets, listening to the quiet around me. Sleep was slow to come. In the middle of the night, I woke suddenly. The silence was broken by a faint noise outside the door. My heart pounded as I sat up and listened. The sound stopped quickly, leaving only the quiet once again. I wondered if it had been my imagination or something real. The next morning, I decided to talk honestly about how I felt. I told him the cabin and the handcuffs had made me uncomfortable. He listened carefully and apologized for not considering my feelings more deeply. He said he valued my trust and wanted the weekend to be a positive experience for both of us. We agreed to leave the cabin earlier than planned. Packing up, I felt relief mixed with disappointment. The weekend had started with promise but ended with unanswered questions. Still, I appreciated his willingness to listen and respect my boundaries. On the drive back to the city, the tension between us eased. We talked about what had happened and what it meant for our future. I realized that trust was fragile and required honesty. The experience at the cabin taught me more about myself and what I needed from a relationship. Looking back, the weekend was a turning point. It was a moment when I faced uncertainty and made choices for my well-being. The handcuffs under the bed were a strange discovery, but they led to important conversations. In the end, I left with a clearer sense of who I was and what I deserved. The cabin remained a quiet place in my memory, a symbol of both curiosity and caution. It was a reminder that sometimes what we do not expect can reveal what we truly need. I walked away knowing that trust, respect, and communication were the keys to any meaningful connection. Story 13. Working in hotel security was supposed to be a straightforward job. Mostly it involved routine checks, monitoring cameras, and making sure guests followed the rules. The building was old but well maintained, with hundreds of rooms spread over several floors. Most nights were uneventful, just the occasional complaint or lost key situation. But one evening during my shift, I noticed a room that had a "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging on the door. At first, it was not unusual. Guests often use the sign to avoid interruptions during their stay. What caught my attention was that the sign stayed on for 3 days straight without anyone entering or leaving. By the third day, I was growing suspicious. Housekeeping had reported no activity from that room, and no calls had come from inside. But normally, if a room goes untouched for so long, we have procedures to check on the occupants for safety reasons. I reported it to my supervisor, but he told me to wait until the guest left or contacted the front desk. Curiosity gnawed at me. The cameras did not show any guests arriving or leaving that particular room during those 3 days. The door was always shut, and no sounds came from inside. It felt like the room was sealed off from the rest of the hotel, like something was wrong. On the 4th day, the front desk received a call from a guest reporting a strange smell coming from the hallway near that room. The scent was faint but unmistakably unpleasant. The manager called me and asked to investigate. I grabbed my keys and a flashlight before heading to the floor. Standing outside the door, I noticed the sign was still hanging. I knocked several times but received no response. The smell was stronger now, a mix of decay and something chemical. I radioed for backup and maintenance to be on standby. The security policy allowed entry if a room was unresponsive for safety reasons, especially when foul odors were reported. I took a deep breath and unlocked the door. The moment it creaked open, a wave of cold, stale air hit my face. The smell was overwhelming. Inside, the room looked abandoned at first glance. The bed was unmade, sheets twisted and stained. The curtains were drawn, blocking out sunlight, and the air conditioner hummed softly. But as I moved deeper, the scene became disturbing. There were dark stains on the carpet and walls. Broken glass and discarded syringes littered the floor near the bathroom. A strong smell of chemicals lingered around the sink and toilet. It was clear someone had been using the room for something far from normal. The bathroom door was locked. I tried to open it, but it was jammed. I called for maintenance to bring tools to force the door open. As I waited, I checked the closet and drawers. Inside, I found scattered papers, some with strange symbols and notes in a shaky handwriting. The notes talked about experiments and warnings, written in a desperate tone. They mentioned pain and fear, referencing people who had come before and the need to escape. It was chilling to read, like someone was trapped inside their own mind and reaching out. Maintenance arrived and forced the bathroom door open. The room was small and filthy. The smell was worse inside, and the light flickered weakly overhead. On the floor lay a man, motionless and pale, barely breathing. I immediately called 911 and started checking his pulse. He was alive but barely conscious. Paramedics arrived quickly and took over. The man was rushed to the hospital, and I stayed behind to secure the scene and gather information. The police began their investigation. They found chemicals and drug paraphernalia in the room, as well as signs of forced isolation. The man was under the influence of multiple substances, and the notes suggested he had been experimenting on himself. The hotel was stunned by the discovery. Afterward, I spoke with the hospital staff. The man survived but was in critical condition. They said his recovery would be long and uncertain. I could not stop thinking about what I had seen and how close it was to becoming a tragedy on the hotel floor. The incident shook me more than any other during my years in security. It reminded me that behind the doors of this hotel, people carried burdens and secrets that no one could see. The job was no longer just about safety and rules. It was about being a silent witness to human suffering. Weeks passed, but the image of that room haunted me. I could not forget the stench, the scattered notes, or the desperation in that man's eyes. I started volunteering for extra shifts, wanting to make sure no one else would suffer unnoticed. Eventually, the hotel installed new safety measures, including wellness checks for guests who had signs of distress. My supervisors thanked me for reporting and handling the situation with care. I was relieved to know that my actions might have saved a life. Even now, I wonder what drove that man to such extremes. The hotel remains a place of refuge for many, but that room is a stark reminder that sometimes help comes too late. I am grateful I was there when they needed me most, and I hope the man found some peace after the darkness. Story 14. I never thought I would end up creating a profile on a sugar dating site, but times were tough. The rent was overdue, and the job I had barely covered groceries. I was careful about what I put in my profile, choosing pictures that were flattering but not too revealing. I told myself it was just a way to make some extra money, something temporary until I got back on my feet. I never expected it to spiral into something dangerous. Within days, I was messaged by several men, most of them harmless or just looking for casual conversation. One man stood out, though. He was polite, well-spoken, and seemed genuinely interested in my life. His messages were thoughtful, and he offered to meet in a nice restaurant downtown. I was nervous but decided to take the chance because the promise of financial support was tempting. Our first meeting was comfortable, even pleasant. He paid for dinner and made me feel special, like I was the only person in the room. He spoke about his business in vague terms, never giving details but sounding important. I felt a mix of excitement and unease, but the money he promised felt like a lifeline. After dinner, he told me he wanted to sponsor me, to take care of my expenses if I agreed to spend time with him regularly. At first, the arrangement was easy. He sent me money for rent and groceries without asking for much in return besides companionship. But soon, things changed. He wanted pictures and videos, some of which made me uncomfortable. I hesitated, but he was persuasive and reminded me that he was helping me stay afloat. I started to feel like I was losing control over the situation, but I told myself it was just part of the deal. One evening, he invited me to a gathering at a fancy apartment. When I arrived, the place was filled with people I did not know. They talked in low voices and watched me like I was on display. I noticed cameras in several corners, and it made me nervous. The man who sponsored me introduced me to others, but the mood was tense, not friendly. Over the next few days, I pieced together what was happening. The group was part of a criminal ring that used women like me to trap powerful men. They arranged meetings, secretly filmed compromising moments, and then used the footage for blackmail. I felt sick as I realized I had been drawn into something far worse than I had imagined. Fear took over, and I wanted out, but I was trapped. I tried to talk to my sponsor about leaving, but he warned me it was not that simple. The group controlled everything, including the information they had on me. I was no longer just a client, I was part of a dangerous game. I felt isolated, unable to trust anyone, and terrified of what might happen if I spoke out. I knew I needed a plan before things got worse. One night, I found a chance. The apartment was quieter than usual, and I noticed a security guard was distracted. I took my phone and discreetly sent a message to a friend, asking her to call 911 if I did not check in within an hour. I hid in the bathroom while they were elsewhere and took pictures of the apartment, the people there, and the equipment they used. Every sound made my heart race. When my sponsor returned, he found me on the phone and accused me of betrayal. I stayed calm and told him I wanted out. He laughed, saying there was no escape. But I had already contacted the authorities. Moments later, police officers swarmed the building. There was chaos as people tried to flee, but many were caught. I was taken to safety and gave my statement, explaining everything I knew. The investigation that followed was intense. The police arrested multiple members of the ring, and the evidence I provided was crucial in their case. I went into witness protection for a while, moved to a new city, and started over. The trauma stayed with me, but so did the relief of breaking free from their grip. I found support through counseling and slowly rebuilt my life. In time, I found a job that paid enough to live without depending on anyone else. I made new friends and reconnected with family members I had pushed away. The memory of the sugar dating site felt like a distant nightmare, something I survived but never wanted to revisit. I learned to trust again, but with caution. Most importantly, I discovered my own strength. Looking back, I realize how desperate I was when I first made that profile. I never imagined it would lead me into a criminal world where I was just a pawn. But I also know that I was brave enough to fight back and seek help. The experience changed me, but it did not define me. Now I live with hope, determined to make choices that protect me in the future I am building. Story 15. I was at the bar that night, just trying to unwind after a long week. The place was noisy and crowded, filled with people laughing and clinking glasses. I had a few drinks, enough to relax but not too many to lose control. Then I noticed a man slumped over at the end of the bar, his head resting on the counter and his skin looking pale. He looked like he was passed out, or maybe worse. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should get help or just leave him alone. But something made me reach over and try to wake him. I tapped his shoulder gently, and when he did not respond, I called out to the bartender. She told me she had already called an ambulance, but it had not arrived yet. Feeling uneasy, I decided to stay with him until help came. I kept talking to him, hoping he would come to, but his breathing stayed shallow and irregular. I thought maybe he had just had too much to drink or was dealing with some kind of medical problem. Well, minutes passed, then what felt like hours, and still no ambulance. At some point I must have nodded off, or maybe passed out myself. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a small, dark, cramped room. The air was stale and smelled like dust and rust. I blinked, trying to adjust my eyes, and realized I was naked, lying on a cold concrete floor. Panic surged through me. I had no idea where I was or how I got there. The walls were metal, like a storage unit I had seen before at a self-storage place. My head hurt, and my mouth felt dry and sticky. I tried to sit up, but my limbs felt weak and sore. I screamed for help, banging on the door with all my strength. My voice echoed back, but no one answered. The only sound was the faint hum of a light somewhere far away. I remembered the man at the bar and wondered if he had anything to do with this. Was this some kind of sick joke or worse? Hours passed, or maybe it was a day. Time lost meaning in that dark box. I tried to keep calm by thinking through what had happened before I fell asleep. I remembered touching the man's shoulder, then the bartender saying the ambulance was on its way. After that, everything was a blur. Eventually, I managed to find a small window near the top of one wall. It was too high to reach, but it let in some light. I tried shouting again, hoping someone might hear me. But no one came. I was completely alone, trapped in a place I did not even know existed. Desperation set in. I looked around for anything to use to escape. There was nothing but some empty cardboard boxes and a few broken pieces of wood. My phone was missing, which only made me more scared. How long had I been here? Who had put me here? And why? The silence was broken by the sound of footsteps outside. My heart jumped, and I started banging on the door again, screaming. The lock rattled, and then it clicked open. A man I did not recognize stood there, his face cold and unreadable. He said nothing but motioned for me to get up. I was too weak to argue. I stumbled out and found myself in a dimly lit hallway lined with similar metal doors. The man led me through it silently. I tried to ask questions, but he just shook his head and kept walking. I realized then that I had no idea where I was or who this man was. We reached the end of the hallway and stepped outside into bright sunlight. I blinked against the light and saw a parking lot filled with storage units. The man pointed to a car parked nearby and told me to get in. I obeyed, still confused and scared. Once inside the car, he handed me a bottle of water and said, "You are safe now." I drank greedily and tried to calm down. He explained that someone had drugged me at the bar and kidnapped me, but he had found me and rescued me. I did not know whether to believe him or not. He took me to the hospital, where the doctors confirmed I had been drugged. They ran tests and took my statement. I told them everything I could remember, including the strange man in the storage unit. The police were involved, and an investigation began. Days later, the police called me with news. They had arrested the man who had drugged and kidnapped me. He had a history of luring people from bars and holding them captive in storage units. They said I was lucky to be alive. I slowly started to recover, both physically and mentally. It was hard to trust people again, but I knew I had to move forward. I found strength in telling my story and helping others understand the dangers that can hide in everyday places. The experience changed me. I learned to listen to my instincts and never ignore that feeling of something being wrong. I also learned how important it is to reach out and ask for help, even when it feels scary. Looking back, I realize how close I came to a fate I still struggle to comprehend. But I survived. And because I survived, I have a chance to live a life that is free, safe, and full of hope. Every day is a gift now, one I do not take for granted. I know I am stronger than I ever thought possible, and I will never forget the night that almost destroyed me. But more importantly, I will never forget the people who helped me find my way back. Story 16. I had always wanted to do something for myself, something that made me feel confident and beautiful. After much hesitation, I finally booked a boudoir photo shoot. The photographer's website was professional, filled with tasteful images and glowing testimonials. It promised an experience designed to empower women, helping them embrace their bodies without shame. I felt hopeful and a little nervous the day I arrived at the studio. The studio was located in a downtown building that looked ordinary from the outside, almost like an office space. Inside, the atmosphere was calm, with soft music playing and a few candles lit around the room. The photographer greeted me warmly and explained the process step by step. They made me feel comfortable, offering water and encouraging me to ask questions at any time. As the session began, I was guided into different poses, some sensual, some playful, all designed to highlight my best features. The photographer was professional, giving clear directions and compliments that made me relax. I felt the nerves start to fade, replaced by a growing sense of confidence. It was exactly what I had hoped for. After a while, the photographer suggested moving to another room for some more intimate shots. The lighting was softer there, and the atmosphere changed, becoming more intense. They encouraged me to trust the process, assuring me it was all about empowerment. I agreed, even though a small voice in my mind urged caution. When the shoot was over, the photographer showed me some of the images on the camera's screen. They looked beautiful and artistic, capturing a side of me I rarely allowed others to see. I felt proud and even a little excited to share the final photos with myself, a reminder of strength and self-love. The photographer promised to edit the pictures and send them to me within a few days. A few days later, I received an email from the photographer with a link to a private gallery. The photos were stunning, and I downloaded them eagerly. But a week later, I stumbled across a message in an online forum that caught my attention. Someone had posted screenshots of images suspiciously similar to mine on a website I did not recognize. The images were presented in a way that made me uncomfortable and felt exploitative. Curious and alarmed, I visited the site. It was an illegal adult website hosting explicit content without the consent of many of the models. My photos were there, alongside others who had no idea their images were being used this way. My heart sank as I realized the photographer had taken my trust and weaponized it against me. I tried contacting the photographer immediately, but they stopped answering my calls and emails. Panic set in as I understood I was just one of many victims. I gathered every piece of evidence I could find, screenshots, emails, and anything that connected me to the site. I reached out to a local advocacy group that helps victims of image-based abuse. With their guidance, I reported the case to the police. The officers were sympathetic but explained that these operations are often complex and difficult to shut down. Still, they assured me they would do everything possible to investigate. I felt a small flicker of hope, knowing I was not alone in this fight. Days turned into weeks, and the emotional toll was immense. I struggled with trust issues and constant anxiety about my privacy. Yet, I refused to let the situation define me. I began writing about my experience anonymously on a support website, sharing what happened and encouraging others to be cautious. The advocacy group connected me with legal professionals who specialized in privacy and internet law. They helped me understand my rights and the steps needed to take down the illegal content. Together, we filed complaints with hosting services and worked to get the photos removed. Each small victory felt like reclaiming a piece of my dignity. Eventually, the police arrested the photographer. It turned out they had been running the illegal site for years, exploiting countless models who thought they were safe. The court case was difficult, but hearing the truth out loud helped me heal. I realized my choice to share my story had given others the courage to come forward too. I returned to photography, but this time as a subject in a very different way. I began collaborating with professionals who respected boundaries and made safety their top priority. The boudoir shoot that started as a nightmare became a stepping stone to empowerment on my own terms. I found strength in setting new boundaries and advocating for myself. Now I speak openly about the risks and rewards of self-expression, hoping to protect others from similar experiences. The scars from betrayal remain, but they do not define me. I am reclaiming my narrative one day at a time, stronger and wiser than before. My journey taught me that empowerment comes not only from within, but from standing up against those who seek to exploit us. Story 17. I joined the group hoping to find a space where I could be open about who I was. It was a community built on trust, honesty, and respect. People shared their experiences, desires, and boundaries freely, which felt refreshing. I had been through relationships that left me feeling boxed in, so this felt like a breath of fresh air. The group was diverse, with couples and singles alike. There was laughter and genuine warmth during our gatherings. I quickly formed bonds with some members, feeling like I had finally found people who understood me. The energy was light and hopeful, a contrast to the isolation I had felt before. Among the group was a couple who stood out in a strange way. They were charismatic and often the center of attention during our meetings. At first, they seemed harmless and even fun to be around. Their stories were wild, but I never imagined the darkness beneath. Over time, I noticed some members seemed uneasy around that couple, but they whispered quietly when the couple was not around. One night, during a casual conversation, a friend warned me to be careful. They hinted that the couple had secrets no one talked about openly. I did not want to believe it, so I brushed off the warning as jealousy or misunderstanding. But my curiosity got the better of me. I started paying closer attention to the couple's behavior. Their smiles sometimes seemed forced, their eyes cold behind the charm. One evening, after a group meeting, the couple invited me to join them for drinks. I hesitated but agreed, wanting to see the truth for myself. At the bar, the conversation turned darker. They spoke in coded language, hinting at desires far more violent than I expected. I felt a chill run down my spine as their words grew more disturbing. It was clear they were not interested in the group's principles of respect and consent. They bragged about manipulating others and pushing boundaries without consequence. I realized then that their involvement in the group was a cover. Fear gripped me, but I kept my composure. I wanted to gather evidence before alerting anyone. Over the following weeks, I observed their actions carefully. I noticed they always sought out newcomers, especially those who seemed vulnerable or unsure. They used charm and flattery to draw people in. The couple's true nature was hidden behind a mask of kindness. But their actions told a different story. Some members disappeared from the group without explanation, and rumors began to swirl. One night, I overheard a conversation between the couple. They were planning something, discussing the next target. My heart pounded as I realized how dangerous they really were. I knew I had to act quickly to protect others. I reached out to a trusted friend within the group and shared my concerns. Together, we gathered information and alerted others quietly. We decided to confront the couple in a controlled way, hoping to expose them without putting anyone in harm's way. During a group meeting, we confronted them with what we knew. The couple denied everything at first, but cracks appeared in their story. Some members recorded the confrontation secretly, capturing their unsettling responses. It was clear they were guilty. We contacted the authorities and provided the evidence. The